Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined by the one, the only, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our new studio inside the walls of Lambeau Field.
How long is it a new studio for? When do we pivot away from the new studio? Training camp?
That's yeah. Maybe by training camp it'll be an old studio.
Old studio.
Yeah.
Then you need to start saying that too. The old studio.
No longer new studio. So the last couple of days, Wes, we have heard from various assistant coaches on both sides of the ball. Had their media sessions on Tuesday and Wednesday.
Yes.
Defensive assistants were on Tuesday, offensive assistants on Wednesday. So we'll start on the defensive side here, and just your impressions or anything that stood out to you. One of those sort of off-season comments that you will take with you between now and training camp when things start to get a little more real.
Yeah, I like the way you structured that. The one thing I will say, it's partially laden in the comment, and it's also about the person. It was really interesting listening to Vince Oghobaase for the first time, because it's happened a couple times in the past. Luke Getsy's one of these guys too, right? Where he was a quality control coach. You don't talk to him, you don't interact with him in terms of the podium stuff, and then he moves into a receivers coach job, and then suddenly a couple years later, here you are talking to him on a weekly basis. Oghobaase came here with Jeff Hafley, and he's, I believe, the only guy that's still here from Jeff when he came over from Boston College. But he was the assistant defensive line coach, so we didn't talk to him the last 2 years of the podium. This is the first time this week where we got a chance to really interact with him and understand, sort of what makes him tick, because we've seen him on the field. As you even asked him, I mean, he's a very expressive person. The play ends, he's running over to his defensive lineman as soon as it's done. And this week was where we finally got a chance to understand the person a little bit more. And what an engaging guy. What an interesting interview to kind of hear his perspective on things, where he came from. Obviously, incredibly appreciative that Matt LaFleur and Jonathan Gannon gave him this opportunity to get this promotion. He's now fully in charge of that interior defensive line, and he's super excited about what potentially they have there at that position. This is one of those spots, Mike. There was only a couple moves made, but it really was an invigoration of the position, I feel like, right? I mean, you have Javon Hargrave comes in now, 33 years old. He's been in the league for 10 years, and now you're going to partner him up with Devontae Wyatt, who's been the young up-and-comer, guy that was probably on the verge of maybe a Pro Bowl season last year before his injury.
Right.
And then Chris McClellan joins that group as well. So the philosophy there, and he talked about it, he's played in 3-4s, he's played in 4-3s, he's not too concerned about that, but just what the mentality of those defensive linemen is going to be this season, I thought was really one of the biggest noteworthy things that came out of these availabilities.
Yeah, I asked Coach Oghobaase, as you said, about sort of his animation on the practice field, because it's been really fun the last couple of training camps when they get into the 11-on-11 and you hear some helmets cracking and stuff in the trenches, and you'll hear just this exclamation from the sideline from one of the coaches, and as you said, come like running in to talk to his guys, and it's VO. He's known as VO around here, Vince Oghobaase. And so when I think of that, that's going to be continuing on the sideline at training camp this year, and then what I saw from the podium as a certain level of intensity, I guess, from Bobby Babich and from Daniel Bullocks, essentially the two secondary coaches that the Packers will have this year, and those are the new additions to the group. I'm getting the feeling that we're going to see a certain level of intensity on the practice field at training camp, or at least in terms of the animation and the vocals and everything that goes on from like play to play during the 11-on-11. I think we're going to be hearing it this summer because it just seems like that's how this defensive coaching staff is built.
Yeah, and it's funny too listening to Babich and Bullocks, because they're different, like their terms of like how their personalities are.
Yeah.
Where Bobby, I mean, there's definitely, he walks in the room, there's an aura involved there, right? I mean, we talked about it a couple years ago when he was in the process of interviewing for the defensive coordinator job. He ended up staying in Buffalo at the time with Sean McDermott, but now he has the opportunity to come to Green Bay. He said he's had some connections and interactions, not only with Jonathan Gannon, having run in those circles, but then also kind of being sort of an offshoot of that Kyle Shanahan tree. He was on those fabled Mike Pettin coaching staffs in the early 2010s. I mean, these Cleveland Browns, that were 7-9, and there was, I think, the Johnny Manziel thing sort of overcame everything. And then you look at that coaching staff and what it produced, the amount of head coaches, the amount of offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. It's quite the extension, right, in terms of how that the Shanahans from Washington sort of got to Cleveland, and then now it's just taken off.
Yeah.
And Babich was a part of that. Whereas with Bullocks, he's very interesting in that this is a guy that was a second-round pick in the NFL in the late 2000s from Detroit, had a slew of injuries, and has worked his way up also off the Shanahan coaching tree, Kyle over in San Francisco. So there's a certain – I thought one of the interesting things about the conversation where it went with both of them was the idea of takeaways. And obviously last year, Green Bay just really struggled to get the interceptions. If I remember correctly, I think Xavier McKinney had more picks in 2024 than the Packers had defensively last year. I think it was 8-7.
Yeah,
so
that's correct.
Figuring out exactly what that formula is, you obviously don't want to chase it, but at the same time, being able to pull those opportunities down when you get them. And as Babich even talked about, it is about taking the ball away. That is the goal of that secondary. And certainly you look at his track record with Micah Hyde, with Jordan Poyer, all those guys in Buffalo for those years. They were prolific at finding ways to make explosive plays on the defensive side of the ball, and that's what he hopes to bring now to Green Bay.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting comment, too, from Coach Bullocks, because he was talking about the takeaways, as you said, and he made the comment, and I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but it was something along the lines of the hardest thing for the defender is essentially to finish the takeaway. It's the challenge at the catch point, right?
Yep.
And that's exactly what we saw was the issue with the Packers last year, because the opportunities were there. Yep. The Packers had numerous opportunities for takeaways, and they just weren't able to secure the interceptions, which they did secure the previous year as McKinney and others racked up an impressive total for the defense as a whole, and that just didn't happen last year. And it wasn't just one guy. McKinney missed his, Carrington Valentine missed his, Keyshawn Nixon missed his. All those guys went into the off season. I'm sure, looking when they went back through the going back through the clips and everything from last year, they were reminded, look at those opportunities, look at those chances that we had. I just thought it was interesting that Bullocks had said, it's as though everything you have to do defensively to put yourself in the right position to make the play, and you have to time your break on the ball, or whether it's the leaving your feet to jump and whatever. But the hardest thing is to finish it, is to catch the ball. It's like your concentration and your focus level has to get even higher when the ball arrives than everything that it takes to just be in that position in the first place. So I thought that was just a very poignant comment relative to how things went for the Packers last year when Bullocks wasn't even here.
Yeah, and I'm reminded too of that play where Isaiah McDuffie ends up colliding with Javon Bullard, right? Where Bullard, if you look at his season last year, what is separating Javon Bullard from a Pro Bowl? It's just the picks.
It's just the stats. That's it.
If you watched him week in and week out, and you don't just look at a stat sheet or a box score, you saw how impactful he was for this defense, how good he slid into the slot and made that his home.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of just trying to get those takeaways, and when he had the opportunity for it, unfortunately, it's kind of like two fielders coming and colliding with each other, underneath the fly ball.
Yeah.
When him and McDuffie kind of ran into each other. But unfortunately, that sort of underscored, I think, some of the issues for the Packers defensively last year. They were better, I feel like, than the 2024 unit in terms of playing to their identity and what they wanted to do. But they weren't able to cash in as much as they did in that debut season with Jeff Hafley. So that is going to be the challenge for them now moving forward. And I think the really exciting aspect of it is that you bring back virtually everybody in the secondary, whether it was the corners or the safeties. And you got to imagine a guy like Xavier McKinney, who still did get a second-team All-Pro nod, but someone that's talked about wanting to establish himself as a Pro Football Hall of Famer and have that type of career. That is his goal, his long-term aspiration, that he's going to be energized now to show out now that they got this scheme going.
Yeah, and one last thought on the defensive side before we switch to the offensive coaches. The new linebackers coach here, Sam Siefkes. Interesting story because a Wisconsin native, he's from Oconomowoc, went to college at UW-La Crosse, and now here he is coaching with the Green Bay Packers. Now he's been other places, and certainly has an impressive coaching resume. I need to get a chance to talk to him, however, about.
I was waiting for this.
Yes, his thoughts about my hometown of Platteville, because for a few years earlier in his coaching career, he was the defensive coordinator for the UW Platteville Pioneers, the Ralph E. Davis Pioneer Stadium, which my parents' house is in the shadow of almost the shadow of the,
you just
the
doxed
stadium there. So I need to talk to talk to Coach Siefkes about his memories of Platteville and what stood out to him. But you talk about a guy living out a dream, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you go into coaching, you're from Wisconsin, and still fairly young, fairly early in his coaching career when you look at the big picture. Here he is as the linebackers coach of the Green Bay Packers.
I was trying to think. I'm going to look this up. Remember we had the whole conversation years ago, now like 13 years ago, about how Randall Cobb was the first player that was drafted from the 1990s birth year.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if Siefkes is – well, no, actually Sean Mannion probably is. I was going to say, is he the first position coach for the Packers that was born in the 90s? Mannion might have been, though. Because I think Mannion was only 32.
Okay.
So, but because we're seeing that now. Now, obviously, they got some quality control guys, some dudes in their 20s. But in terms of actually having a position, this guy has climbed very quickly. I honestly was waiting at the press conference for you to bring up Platteville. I know. I was stunned that did not come out. The word Platteville had not been uttered at least 15 times during that press conference. But listen to this, though, Mike. I think this is such an intriguing, and actually, another conversation probably is, hey, how familiar are you with Brian Gutekunst's story? Because honestly, him and Siefkes, their stories almost are parallel to each other, right? Where
one went into coaching, one went into scouting, but very similar.
They both played at lacrosse. Their careers both ended due to injury, and they both ended up as student assistants at lacrosse, and then that was sort of their gateway into getting into this thing. But the thing here with Siefkes, it was lacrosse, and then he got a really quick internship down at FIU, Florida International. The conversation came up about how he kind of got in with Wisconsin and being able to help out there with Dave Aranda for a year. And then it was, dude, you talk about a guy that just completely crawled his way up, just tooth and nail, just one step after another. The 2 years at Platteville, goes to Wofford for 3 years, and then he gets the defensive quality control job with Minnesota. And that was sort of his entryway to things. He ends up latching on with Jonathan Gannon in Arizona, has the time there with him, goes to Virginia Tech as a defensive coordinator. Now here he is in Green Bay back with Gannon. So certainly you don't go that far. You don't climb that quickly if you don't have the aptitude for it, if you don't have the skills for it. And like he talked about, and we'll talk about this with the offensive coaches too, but how many of these young guys have come up and, they're football players. They obviously have aspirations, but they also are teachers, right? And he mentioned that too, that he was kind of going down the teaching route. And regardless of what the subject matter is, he likes working with kids. He likes working with players, and that's what allowed him to kind of go down this path. But 34 years old now, taking over the linebacker room. I think he's 4 years older than Zaire Franklin.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Now he's going to be coaching that position.
Yeah, there you go. Well, it's been fun to get to know, at least get that introduction to some of the new coaches. And I do want to switch over to the offensive side of the ball, but very quickly, let's hear a word from our sponsor. SiriusXM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. Welcome back to Packers Unscripted. All right, Wes, offensive assistant coaches that we heard from on Wednesday. I'm going to let you start with this one because I know it's someone that you've developed a connection with over the years, going back to when Christian Watson was drafted by the Green Bay Packers in the second round a handful of years ago, and that is the new receivers coach, Noah Pauley, who also was Watson's receivers coach for the entirety of his career at North Dakota State.
Yeah, almost all of it, other than I think maybe his freshman year when he got recruited there. But Pauley, I mean, this guy has had an unbelievable rise. Kind of like Siefkes as well, but I mean, he's been with Matt Campbell at Iowa State. He was going to go to Penn State with him.
Yeah.
Now that he got that job, he mentioned he had that 7 weeks there, had been living in an Airbnb with the other coaches. He's getting ready to move his family out there, and then this opportunity comes along, and obviously he had to jump at it. Duluth, Minnesota was a really good player there too. Smaller dude. He's on my eye level, so it always gives you an idea of kind of the type of player you're looking at here. But the thing that's really neat about him that I enjoyed is when you go back and we've all done these stories when you talk to college coaches or just people that know these prospects when they get drafted. When you hear them talk about a particular player, and then you get to know the player, right? It was something I always go back to in 2020 when I did my profile on Jordan Love, and talking to the people around him and his cool demeanor and just the way he led and all that. And then here we are 6 years later. No, those are all the staples now with number 10 on the field. Christian Watson was the same way. This is a guy that was extremely lightly recruited despite being in Tampa. He ends up in North Dakota State. Pauley and that staff come on, and he ends up becoming a legitimate NFL prospect. And, mentioning Pauley had talked about the relationship that they had built together. And just coincidentally, that same year that Watson got drafted in the second round by Green Bay, Pauley ended up coming up here for the Bill Walsh internship that summer during the offseason program.
Right.
So he got a chance to be around Jason Vrable. He explained some of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon as far as what their connection is.
Yeah.
And then being able to get around Matt LaFleur. 4 years pass, he works himself up the coaching ladder, and then here he is now with this chance. And kind of like I said with Siefkes, this is a guy, again, who, he talked about his dad, working in criminal justice and that sort of thing. He was a guy that just wanted to help people. It didn't matter if it was a kid. He even mentioned one of the years that he was out of football and coaching, he was putting together a K-8 curriculum, and a sports plan, for a school. These are the type of paths that these guys sometimes travel. And for Pauley to come in now and inherit that room, I think it's really important because, Jason Vrable is obviously, he'll go to the podium, we ask him tons of questions about the receivers, but Pauley's the one that's going to be in there in the weeds with them. And to have that relationship with Christian Watson and how far they go back and using those inroads now to understand and learn about the rest of the guys in that room, there's probably no position, I don't think, Mike, with a higher ceiling going into 2026 in the Green Bay Packers receivers room, and Matt LaFleur has entrusted Pauley to be the one that helps him get there. Yeah,
and that brings me to another comment. There are a couple of comments that stood out to me from the Packers coaches, and for the most part, other than Pauley on the offensive side, these are all guys that we know that they've been around here. But when you talk about the receivers, we heard from Jason Vrable, who had been the receivers coach, and he's the passing game coordinator. He's been with Matt LaFleur now for a long time.
One of the originals here.
And we're going to spend certainly plenty of time talking about Christian Watson, Jayden Reed, Matthew Golden. Looks like very clearly the Packers' top 3 at wide receiver here heading into 2026. But what I heard from Vrable was sort of a very subtle message of, don't sleep on Savion Williams, right? Did you hear it too? I mean, he talked about Savion coming back, dealing with the foot injury his rookie year. It kept him out of practice. So he was just, basically practicing when he could, but on a limited basis. And he was out there doing some of the return game during the season. The Packers were trying to work him in offensively. And then at some point it got to where they just had to shut him down, and that was it. But when you hear Jason Vrable talk about the size and the power in the body of Savion Williams and what they feel he can potentially do with the ball in his hands, this is a guy, I think, even though he will probably be listed on everybody's depth chart as wide receiver 4.
Yeah.
I think this is a guy who's going to have a role in some way, shape, or form on this Packers offense and potentially on special teams as well.
Great point you raise, Mike. And for me, the moment that he was talking about it, I was almost reminded of the old Buzz Williams Marquette paint touches rule, where every possession he wants that ball in the paint at some point, right? Because of what it does to collapse a defense. That's kind of what I'm thinking now with Savion Williams. Me personally, I even wrote this in inbox. I really want to see him run more routes this year because he's a really good contested catcher. It's not like this guy's just, he has some blazing speed, he gets open, you throw him the ball. No, we saw several times last year when he needed to make a catch at the high point, he needed to beat a cornerback and be physical. He can use that body to do that.
Yep.
But it really comes down to, I think he just needs to touch the ball 5-6 times a game and just see what happens with it. I think they got to be somewhat pragmatic about how often they use him as a ball carrier, just based on the attrition and what happened with his body last year. But listen, so many people focused on, they're extending Jayden Reed. They got to give Matthew Golden more opportunities. That's why Dontavian Wicks was traded. That's why Romeo Doubs, was allowed to leave in free agency. Yeah. And so much that focused on those big 3 and how it affects them. I think the other thing is you wanted to see Savion Williams as a third-round pick last year rise up the depth chart.
Yeah.
And then you obviously got to build out options too, right? Whether it's Bo, whether it's some of these other guys that are available. They brought back a ton of dudes from the practice squad too last year. But the fact is that Williams has such a unique skill set that I just think the Packers got to find a way to integrate it in this offense, assuming you can keep him healthy. And I think that was a lot of this stuff that Vrable was talking about. It's all right there for them. They just need to get number 83 out there.
Yeah, it's definitely something that that sort of piqued my curiosity in hearing him talk about Savion in that way. So something to file away, kind of in the back of our minds as the summer and early fall roll around here eventually. The other comment that stood out to me was the second time. It's really the second time this offseason, once from Brian Gutekunst and now from Luke Butkus, that we've heard that the film of the Week 18 game at Minnesota was really, really impressive in terms of what Jacob Monk did at center on the offensive line. He essentially played the entire game. And when you're looking at, the Packers, obviously, they signed Sean Ryan to a 3-year contract to be the center after he played, roughly the second half of the season last year at that position, and they really liked what they saw. When you're talking about the depth and how this is going to shake out, the Packers feel like Jacob Monk gave them a really big vote of confidence, or I should say he earned their vote of confidence in terms of what he can be at any of those interior spots, I think, in terms of center or either guard. They drafted Jagger Burton, who is the same type of player in that regard. And as we talked about after the draft, it kind of shifts the idea of the backup tackles being, Travis Glover, Darian Kennard, guys like that. So just the fact that that it was the second time this offseason that we've heard some very, very positive comments about that Week 8, which was otherwise a forgettable offensive performance because of the struggles at quarterback. But what Jacob Monk did and what he put on film was really something that caught the Packers' eye.
I'm going to put you on the spot here because you and I did not talk about this in our pre-production meeting and staff dining. But what were
the show truly is unscripted, folks.
Can you tell me the two things that were different about that game with Minnesota with Jacob Monk than anything else we'd seen the rest of this season? And if you're stumped, I'll be able to hit you with them right away if you want.
Go ahead.
He's playing his natural position and he was healthy. Now, and I'm with you. Like the Packers have cross-trained him. They've worked him at guard. But let's be honest. When they moved up to get him 2 years ago, they moved assets to go get him in the 5th round.
Yeah, 5th round.
In 2024.
That's right.
They were working him at different spots, and he played different spots, but where did he ultimately settle in at Duke? What was he known for at Duke? He was known for what he did at center. That is his home base. And he was able to go out there. Despite everything that was going against Green Bay that day, he was able to play his natural position, and the hamstring injury was behind him. That landed him on injury reserve for half the season.
Yeah, and that's why we didn't see him during the preseason last year, and there wasn't any talk about him and whatnot because he was dealing with the injury and just trying to get back on the practice field, and so he wasn't part of the depth mix last year. But then, lo and behold, he got himself healthy by the end of the season. He got the opportunity against Minnesota and showed out pretty well.
And that's why I'm really excited about this bunch in general. Now, I think there are some, I don't want to call them limitations, but there are huge question marks right now at the tackle position because where last year you had Rasheed Walker and you had Jordan Morgan, you had two guys that you were pretty confident both major in left tackle.
Yeah.
That isn't really there right now. Morgan is going to be the incumbent there, but his potential backups may be starting at other positions, whether it's Anthony Belton, whether it is Zach Tom over at right tackle. But what's still intriguing about it, even though you don't have necessarily a LT2 right now, is how many of these guys depth-wise Green Bay has assembled. Whether it is Monk, whether it is Burton coming into this room right now, Donovan Jennings returning, right? The list goes on and on. They re-upped Darian Kennard after they traded for him last year from Philadelphia.
Right.
There are so many guys, and not every thing on the board is going to hit, right? You're not going to hit every number. But the hope would be, by Green Bay putting this many chips out on the table, you're going to find a guy there that could be the dude that's going to be the next to step up, and then maybe if they need to be the guy that could start this season if injuries happen. You're hoping that you can find 2 or 3 of those guys that are going to differentiate, they're going to separate themselves from the pack. And for Monk to be able to put the setbacks behind him, and there's been plenty of them the last 2 seasons, and finish out the season the way that he did.
Yeah.
I think that was one of the few silver linings from that game with Minnesota, because what were the Packers looking for in that game? They wanted to see them come out of that healthy going into the wild card weekend, and they wanted to see who was going to step up. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing the 3 stars of the game that day, for as disappointing as the outcome was against Minnesota, Jacob Monk definitely gets one of those.
Yeah, we hear all the time. We hear from the coaches. We hear from Matt LaFleur, from Brian Gutekunst, who is going to make the most of his opportunity, who is going to seize the day, take advantage of that chance when it's handed to him. And Jacob Monk did that in Week 18 last year.
Do you know who else did that back in the day? Lane Taylor.
Yeah.
Right? Lucas Patrick. TJ Lang. These are when you're going to be on the bench for a few years. TJ Lang could go in here and do a seminar every year with the Packers offensive line and talk about the fact it took 2.5 years for him to find that starting spot, whether it be opportunity or just himself getting him, being professional, getting himself and maturing as a player into that spot. But it's not always going to happen overnight. Everybody wants to be David Bakhtiari, right? The Cinderella story, 4th round pick that comes in, and suddenly you're the starting left tackle of the Green Bay Packers. Yeah. It's not always going to be that path. And I think that's an important lesson for all these guys to learn. Certainly Sean embodies that too. A guy that barely played his rookie year, had to rotate for 2 years, better part of 3 years before getting a shot. And now he is the incumbent at center. Yeah.
Before we go, any other thoughts from the offensive assistants that stood out to you?
I got to talk about MarShawn Lloyd. And I know it's a little bit of this Voldemort thing. You don't want to jinx anything with him. But here's the deal. And I used it as my Insider Inbox headline the day that this is airing on Thursday. This guy has done every single thing right that he can possibly do, right? He has listened to every single thing the training staff has told him. He's seen the experts in Madison. He's seen the experts now on the West Coast. He has his own separate workout process now for these practices, this warm-up for getting ready for practices. And knock on wood, he's been healthy so far. This is a massive year for him, obviously trying to get his career jump-started. But, Michael, the runway is clear with respect to Chris Brooks, because Chris is a very good asset. The Packers signed him to a 2-year deal for a reason.
Yep.
He's accountable. He's obviously really good in pass pro. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, and he can run with the football too. But they drafted MarShawn Lloyd in the 3rd round for a reason.
Yeah.
There's a reason Daniel Jeremiah said that this is the best running back in this draft class. He has things that you cannot coach, and the Packers have been just trying with all their might to get him out on the field. You're crossing your fingers, you're dotting your I's, everything to get him out there. But Ben Sirmans, a guy that has talked about just the challenges that MarShawn has faced, mentioning just how good he's looked here early on. That's the best you can do right now.
Yeah.
That's all you can hope for.
Yep.
We're going to get some OTA practices. We're going to get some mini camp practices. He's going to have a small break, and then it's going to be go time during training camp. But for him to be in this position, you hope that his headspace is clear, he's confident, and can finally start to be the player everybody wants him to be, because honestly, the Packers need him. He is a change of pace for that background that nobody else is right now. And they didn't draft a running back. They haven't really. They signed Nixon as an undrafted free agent, but there's no veteran that just got brought in through unrestricted free agency. MarShawn Lloyd, Brooks, those are the guys.
Yeah.
And the Packers need them to be the guys.
Yeah, and I would just say, and you and I sort of answer this in Insider Inbox a lot, other chats that I've done, whatnot. I understand the frustration from the fans of the Packers spent a 3rd round pick on this guy. He hasn't been able to stay healthy, and here we are. He's going into year 3 now, and we've hardly seen him on the field at all, right? And I get it. I get the fans, the patience wearing thin and all that kind of stuff. Just take a deep breath and realize that however frustrated you are as a fan with this situation with a very, very promising player, just imagine how frustrated he is, right? And what he is working on, what he is putting himself through to try to get to the point that he can deliver on what everybody believes he can deliver for this team. So just always remember there's a human behind that face mask, and you and I have talked to him. You've talked to him more than I have. This is a young man, as you said right at the beginning. He does everything right. Mm-hmm. There is ample reason to root for him and hope that this is the year that he begins, and hopefully it's just the beginning, that he begins to fulfill his NFL potential.
Yeah, without a doubt. And obviously his mom raised him right. And the fact is, too, Mike, I'm not going to name names, but you and I have been in these locker rooms. Guys can get really punchy about injuries.
Yep.
And it doesn't have to be even a string of injuries like MarShawn has. It could be one thing that keeps you out for a few weeks, right? I'll name one name. I love the guy, but like Jordy Nelson did not like talking about his injuries, right? MarShawn has been asked about it maybe more than any player that I can ever think of here, because of what he plays for a position, where he was drafted.
Right.
The light is shining really brightly on him, and every single time he does it with a smile. He does it with professionalism. He doesn't get testy. He doesn't get curt about it. He understands where the media is coming from. And I think, honestly, the people that have covered him understand where he is coming from.
Yeah.
Because how many times have we seen him? People make, their little comments about, oh, he's on, he's with the train stuff. That dude is putting everything he has into making sure that he can be the player the Packers want him to be.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see what happens. And obviously there's a lot of question marks. You have to do it on the grass at the end of the day. You have to be available there in week 1. But, MarShawn Lloyd is here for a reason.
Yeah.
And hopefully he gets a chance to show everybody why.
Absolutely. With that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. And we will see you next time.